Hello and welcome to Empire of Wargames. I am back and I'm uploading the second video now because GW decided to show off new contrast paints literally a couple of minutes after I uploaded my last video. So what the heck, why not just go over them and talk about why my theories might not be out of the window just yet. Let's get into the video. Alright, so as I said in the intro, GW decided to show off a lot of new paints, specifically contrasts and shades. And yeah, did they show off whatever I expected? Not just quite yet, because I was expecting to talk about all of the stuff we are talking about right now in July. That didn't happen, but my theory is not out of the window quite yet, because there is still a high chance and a high probability that we are going to get metallic contrasts still. They have not been shown off today, and I still think that these are going to be a thing. Now, what did GW show right now? Like literally a couple of minutes ago, a ton of new stuff. So let's go over it one by one and talk a little bit about it. First up, we have new shades, specifically kind of a beige tone, a reddish tone, some kind of green or leaf tone. Poxwalker is, I don't know, teal kind of. We have a gray tone, which could be a replacement for a cool white if you want it really, really bright and just throw it over a primer, which could work. Then there's kind of a slightly glossy looking brown. And then there's a really bright, for shade purposes, blue. So the shades look interesting. I think they are just expanding the range. They are not outright replacing anything. At least that is what I'm getting out of the article. The other important thing to mention is that they reformulated all of their shade range. So these 7 paints you see in front of you are going to be added as new paints, and the other previous shades are all going to be with a new formula, but they are going to keep the name, thank God, and I hope they are not going to look too different for all the people who still like a uniform look for their army and just, you know, enjoy having the same kind of paint. I just hope it, you know, drops into the recesses better, or whatever a shade could do better with a new formula. Next up, let's take a look at the new contrast paints. There are 25 total, and some of them look very, very unique. Obviously, if you have done anything with GW and you have seen and painted models, you definitely have heard of contrast paints. Contrast paints are there to shade the miniature for you, to tint the surface, and to create subtle highlights, because the paint usually pulls away from the highest spots of whatever surface you are painting. That's how contrast paints work, very simple. I obviously always recommend dry brushing over contrast paints, just because it looks better and it really brings the model together. But this is not a painting video. Let's talk about the colors we have available. The first couple we see here are supposed to be the brightest and most striking colors of the range, and there are some here that I really, really appreciate. The first one is Contrast Frostheart, which is basically an icy blue or bright blue, whatever you might call it. Really, really cool color. Then we have a kind of teal color, which looks like kind of Pterodon turquoise or Leviathan blue or whatever it was called. But yeah, we already had a very similar color, so not sure about this one yet. I will have to test this one. Then we have Striking Scorpion Green. This is a color I really appreciate, because Warp Lightning, while being bright, was not quite bright enough. And the color I'm really, really excited about, because yellow is my favorite color, is Contrast Imperial Fist. Why? Because Yellow, while being bright and so on, was very orangey in the recesses, and it's not something everyone wants on every model. It might look great on Eldar models, or if you are going for that kind of vibe for your model, but I personally really wanted a bright yellow that is not orange in the recesses, and that seems to be the case with Imperial Fist, and it's going to make the life of so many people easier who just want to have yellow models painted. Now, will you still have a problem with bigger models? Yes. Keep in mind that if you don't have an airbrush and if you rely on contrast paints to paint a crisp yellow, you're still going to have somewhat of a problem painting a Repulsor Executioner, for example, because painting those super flat, huge surfaces with a contrast paint is still very, very difficult to get right. So just keep that in mind whenever you decide to paint an army and you go for contrast paints. Painting contrast paints without an airbrush on big surfaces is very difficult. Then we have Eldari Emerald, which seems to be a cool little also teal greenish color, which looks great. And finally, a good purple that is kind of still the darker purple, but it's still popping and looking interesting. I really like the colors here, especially the Imperial Fist looks amazing, and I'm looking forward to using it. Next, we have even more bright colors. We have Magma Drought Flame, which is a super bright orange. The orange we had previously, which was Griff Charger or Griff Hound orange, was a little bit on the I don't know, tamer side. It was a little bit darker. It was kind of a neutral orange, which was fine, but having a super bright orange to use for flames, for example, works out very well. You can see kind of a flame contrast range here with Magma Drought, Ball Red, and Batmoon's Yellow, and that would be an easy base over a white primer to create kind of a flame effect if you so wanted to. Ball Red is an interesting red. It is kind of between a magenta and a red tone. I'm not sure I would use that for Blood Angels. I really, really like the Blood Angels contrast paint, so I probably would still use that one for my Blood Angels. But Ball Red looks to be an interesting color for people who don't quite want the Doomfire Magenta, but something more with a reddish tone. I'm not sure which chapter this would apply to, or which kind of paint scheme I would go with this color, but it looks interesting, a little bit something to think about. Azurman Blue looks like your basic kind of in-between blue, because our blues were kind of the ones we had in the contrast range were very, very different. So we had Ultramarines Blue, which is really, really dark, and then we had Talazar Blue, which is really, really bright, and nothing in between, and this seems to bridge the gap. So it's good to have kind of a medium neutral blue in there. Doomfire Magenta has magenta, looks great. Kandra's green looks very much like Warp Lightning, maybe a touch brighter. Not sure about this one, and if this one was needed. This one is still is another paint I will have to test out myself. And Batmoon Yellow seems to be like the Imperial Fist Yellow, without any orange recess shading, but more kind of a, it kind of looks primed, to be completely honest. The recesses are not really shaded. I don't know. Except for the Azurman Blue and the Kandra's Green and maybe Doomfire Magenta, all of the models don't really look that heavily recess shaded, simply because of the contrast. And especially the Batmoon Yellow on the orc, you can see, it really doesn't seem very recess shaded. So that's another thing I will have to test and hopefully make a video about. Hopefully I get a video set up for that. Let's continue. We have Ethereal and Eerie colors, which are basically just kind of the recesses and maybe a little bit of a slight tint over your primer. And we have a Briar Queen Chill, which is very similar to Athematic Blue, but it's a little bit more of a teal kind of color, and it seems to be coloring the white prime model to slightly more of a dark gray. Not sure what is happening and how this works, but it looks kind of cool. Then we have Mantis Warrior Green, which is just an interesting green color, which greenish yellow. Not sure I would use that for anything other than maybe weathering or for terrain, but it looks interesting. I will have to test this one out. I don't really like the color or the hue, but it looks interesting enough. And then we have Pillar Glacier, I think it's pronounced or called. This one looks really cool. This one looks like Athematic Blue, but the blue is not that kind of icy blue, but rather a little bit of a stronger, more defined blue, a little bit brighter. And yeah, this one looks interesting as well, maybe for ice effects. Maybe you just want to spray paint your base white and go over with that paint to make it look a little bit frosty, a little bit cold maybe, and this would work very well with that. Gut Ripper Flash. Ooh, this one is something in between a green and a beige tone. Not sure I would use that for orcs per se, but it looks very, very nice for stuff like maybe Skaven fur or that kind of stuff. It would work if you want to go for a brighter fur color that maybe looks a little bit dirty. That will work for that. Then we have Dreadful Visage. This one was kind of meant to be a kind of demon at height, I think. It works. It has a slight purpley tone together with a beige kind of main tone to go together with that. Not sure I would use that for anything right now, but it looked like an interesting idea, and I'm sure people will make use of the entire range. Next, we have Steadfast and Grounded. Whatever that means, it looks like these paints seem to be covering after one thicker coat, like really strongly. These ones seem to have a different viscosity as well. Obviously different, difficult to tell without me actually having the paints here and trying to apply them myself. But these look to be thicker contrast paints. As you know, the contrast range has very, very different contrast paints, and they behave very differently. If you use Celestion Blue and then try to use Ultramarine Blue, those two paints behave completely differently. So these are, I think, more in the kind of Ultramarines Blue range, where they cover very strongly and you need to be very, very careful how you apply them, or it's going to look bad. The first paint we have here is Celestion Blue, and I'm probably going to use this one for my Void Tridents, which I recently decided to start because I have some Space Marine models I don't need for my other chapter, so I'm just going to start a new one. And Celestion Blue seems to fit the bill. It is a little bit of a darker blue, but it looks kind of interesting. We have Stormfiend, which is again a teal that seems to be a little bit darker. We have a burgundy color, which we didn't have before. We have Garak Sewer, which looks a little bit, it looks very samey to Wildwood, so I'm not sure where the difference between those two paints is. We have Black Legion, which seems to be a much stronger Black Templar. We have Rattling Grime, which is kind of a mix between a dark gray and a brownish tone, which will see a lot of use, especially for fur. Then we have Leviathan Purple, which seems to be brighter on the edges and darker in the recesses compared to the purple we have right now. Not sure how it's called. And we have Iron Jaws Yellow, another yellow tone, which seems to lean more into the orangey kind of thing in the recesses, but not quite as strongly as the Yandan Yellow. So we have 3 yellow tones. I'm just going to point it out because that is awesome. I'm really looking forward to paint all of my models yellow and try all of that out because I'm very, very excited for that. Now, what does all of this mean? All of this means that dropper bottles are not going to happen. Why? Because what you can see here are new paints and they're in pots. So no dropper bottles for you. Will we see metallic contrast paints? Yes, I'm fairly certain whatever they announced with their teaser video for July is going to be metallic contrast. Fairly certain. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the new primer, White Scar. They said that it's going to be way less volatile, way easier to apply. I'm going to test that as well. But if you are a fan of the current Corex White, which is a kind of a very, very bright gray, and you want to paint your models in the same kind of way, or if you have a model range that has to look very, or basically exactly the same, you should probably go out and get a couple of cans of Corex White before it's getting replaced with White Scar, because I think Corex White is getting replaced by White Scar. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Other than that, that is that for the article. I really wanted to talk about this because, yeah, the announcement came out of nowhere after I uploaded my video. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this now. Do you have any opinions on all of the contrast paints? Will you use them? Are you using them right now? Will you upgrade your range or buy a couple of the new ones? Let me know in the comments below, and especially if and what you think about the Corex White replacement White Scar. Primers are usually a very finicky and interesting topic, especially white primers. So I would really like to know your opinion on that one. Alright, I hope I see you in the next video. Take care.